ほう、向かってくるのか。逃げずにこのディオに近づいてくるのか。
近づかなきゃてめえをぶちのめせないんでな。
ほうほう。では十分近づくがよい。
You might be wondering why there is a JoJo scene in this video. Well, that's because the Japanese voice actor for Wriothesley is the same person who voiced Jotaro in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 3. Hello everyone and welcome back to another video, and this time around, let us take a look at our resident Hydro Dragon fan Wriothesley, I think that's how you call it, and the genderless bard Venti on whether you should pull for them or not. Wriothesley is the first Cryo Catalyst character to be introduced in the game, whose gameplay mostly revolves around punching the enemies to oblivion. Similar to Wanderer, his elemental skill greatly enhances the damage done by his auto attacks. His elemental burst is a very simple yet straightforward high damaging ability where he deals cryo damage to anything in front of him. Every hit from his normal attacks will drain a portion of his HP, and after a certain number of hits, he will gain a symbol that indicates that his next charge attack is greatly enhanced. So this enhanced charge attack will do more damage and heals Wriothesley if it hits an enemy. His exploration passive gives a chance at doubling weapon ascension materials upon crafting. So what do I think of him? Since he is another Fontaine character, his health drain and healing mechanic is nothing new, given that we've seen this in the likes of Lini and Novelette. His punching playstyle reminds me of Hazo, except he seems to be geared more towards an on-field DPS playstyle, while Hazo is more of like a driver or quick swap damage dealer, with possibly bearing the Viridescent Venera 4-piece set just to buff the team's overall damage. So Wriothesley is very likely going to be a decent character similar to Novelette. However, his vision being Cryo would put him in quite an interesting spot. As some of you may know, or maybe you don't, Cryo's most popular team is the Perma-Freeze team, where you would combine Cryo and Hydro to freeze any mobs that can be frozen, and use an Anemo grouper unit like Venti or Kazuha to just make it easy for you to finish them all at once and make sure they are grouped together. So the whole point of this team is that you can do damage and they cannot. So another type of Cryo team that you could also run would be the Melt variant. However, that is a very situational team. At least from my experience, the best Melt team is a team that only comprises of 4-star characters, which are Kaeya, Rosaria, Bennett, and Xiangling. So this team works very well for a few reasons. First of all, everyone's burst, except for Bennett, snapshots. What this means is that their elemental burst will take the character's buff stat at the moment of casting. Not to mention, both Rosaria and Xiangling's burst has no ICD or internal cooldown, which means their abilities will apply an element as long as it hits, and it will trigger a reaction whenever it can. Plus, Xiangling and Kaeya's elemental burst follows the active character around. So in the event that the enemies move away from their original position, you won't be losing that much damage, as you can basically chase them and you can still continue keeping that damage uptime. So another melt team that I have used before is the Ganyu melt team, whether it be the Burn Melt variant, the Bennett Xiangling variant, or the Jin Sun Fire variant. The thing is about Ganyu Melt, right, is the team is a bit cringe to play because it's a very situational team. It completely relies on you being near the enemy, and it's mostly really good for single target, even though you have other options. So Wriothesley is very likely going to be used in these types of archetypes, like, whether it be the Perma-Freeze or the Melt team, and personally, I don't really feel like he adds anything new to the game. So for his teammates, very likely that you are going to need Cryo's premium support, the one and only Shen-He. If you want to buff his personal damage, she is definitely a must-go, given that her elemental skill and some of her ascension does buff cryo damage a lot, given how, she is basically made for Ayaka. And given that she is a 5-star, it's gonna be a bit tricky because it's like running Ayaka Perma-Freeze team without having Shen-He. It's not really going to be as good as with Shen-He. And I can say this personally because I've tried both the F2P variant with Rosaria or Diona, and I've tried it with the likes of Shen-He, and I can tell you, you need Shen-He to make your personal damage better, especially in a Perma-Freeze team. So other options for his teammates shouldn't really be that different in these teams that I've just mentioned just now, like Bennett and Xiangling to run like a melt team, Kazuha because Kazuha and his damage buff and a Viridescent Venera holder, Rosaria if you're more of an F2P and if you want to go for more personal damage and assisting Wriothesley in the crit rate buff, though very likely because Wriothesley has a HP drain mechanic like every other Fontaine character, that means you're probably going to be running the Mare Sussy Hansa, and you probably don't need that much crit rate, so it's a bit less relevant. Diona, if you want a decent shield and maybe a bit of healing, maybe I'm not really sure how often Wriothesley is going to heal, whether he'll be a self-sustaining character like Neuvillette or maybe he'll be a bit worse than that, we won't really know until next week. So Layla would be a really good defensive option because she does offer a strong shield and you can run the full tenacity of the Millilith quite reliably. And if you have her Constellation 4, it actually helps Wriothesley in a lot of ways because Constellation 4 makes it so that whoever has the shield, Layla's shield specifically, will get the normal and charge attacks buff based on how much HP Layla has, like max HP. So overall, I don't really think Wriothesley is going to add much value to most accounts, especially if you have other options, but at least his burst animation looks something like straight out of Star Rail, which is pretty cool to be honest. And while I didn't really talk too much about Ayaka, but very likely she is going to be the character that a lot of people, if not most people, will compare him to, due to how similar their roles are to that extent. If it was up to me, I wouldn't really pull for him because once again, he doesn't add anything new to the game. There's no fancy, crazy mechanic, and I don't feel like his gameplay is all that fun. Maybe the sound effects, maybe it will actually feel really good to play, but I've tried Neuvillette, and if you were to ask me to choose between Wriothesley and Neuvillette, I would just go for Neuvillette any day of the week. But hey, this is entirely my subjective opinion. So while that is out of the way, now let us move on to the one person that Rosaria can't seem to call their name correctly. So Venti. Venti goes by a lot of names, whether it be the Tone-Deaf Bard or Barbatos, the freaking Anemo Archon the Archon from Mondstadt. But the real name that he should go by is the Laziest Archon, because we know canonically he is the kind of person who would skip classes just to loiter somewhere else. And I'm pretty sure I've read this somewhere, but I remember Venti went to the Wolf of the North, Boreas, and offered him a position to be Mondstadt's Archon, or the Anemo Archon, because he just doesn't want to be shackled by this responsibility. And then I'm pretty sure Boreas said like, bro, what do you mean? I think this was in the short, but it was quite a while ago. Anyways, him being one of the 7 Archons in Tevat, we know that all Archons are going to be busted in their own ways. Especially for Venti, his specialty is grouping small mobs together and he does it really, really well. So his elemental skill does a simple wind gust thing if you tap it, which generates I think like 3 particles according to Kaching mains. And if you hold it, it creates an upward current that stays for like 20 seconds thanks to his Ascension 1, I believe. So this wind current, or the whole version, is generally good for exploration if you don't have other exploration options like Kazuha, Wanderer or Kirara. And as an OG Venti owner who's had him since back in patch 1.0, I cannot tell you how busted this was back in the day, since there were literally no other options. I was one of those people who were like, yes, Genshin is my first gacha game. Yes, I know I won 50-50 super early and got one of the best characters in the game, but I've never played a gacha game and Genshin was very new back then, so I didn't actually know and I didn't really appreciate him for how good he was. Now, let's move on to that part of the argument. So his magnum opus, the Elemental Burst, summons a black hole in the direction that Venti is aiming and it pulls all enemies that can be pullable into it. While this may not work in some scenarios, it is very busted when it does. Especially in the likes of say floor 11 of the Spiral Abyss on the first chamber where you have to defend against the monument. No, you have to defend the tower thing in the center. I think it's called a tower. I don't know the exact name. And against multi-wave content, Venti is the GOAT when it comes to grouping enemies together. Events like the Hyakunin Iki or the Chasm Resonance Stone event thing, those kind of events really makes him shine because, you know, it's multi-wave and you can just put one burst, just drop the burst and let all the enemies come in and just finish them off one by one by one by one. And usually, right, in team building, you would always build a team around the carry or the damage dealers, but Venti kind of wants you to do otherwise. Well, in fact, you know what? You don't even need to do that. Just slap him on a team if you need his grouping capability to make your life easy or to make certain situations doable. The only downsides that he really has are in these 2 situations. So for the first situation, he doesn't really work well against non-CCable or non-pullable enemies such as bosses and certain elite enemies like the Consecrated Beast. Some of these enemies I think just generally don't have that weight or whatnot. Now the second situation would be that you can't really run some characters because when the enemies get sucked in by Venti's burst, they get lifted off the ground. So some characters have abilities that can't really hit them. Like for example, Hu Cao's charge attack will not hit him, but you can run maybe someone like Xiao or someone like Wanderer. Those characters can hit him. So this would add more of a limiting factor to running him in situations that you would put him in a team. So other than these 2 situations, he's basically an S tier unit whenever he works. So in terms of overall account value, I would definitely say Venti adds a lot just simply without a doubt. While I personally don't really take Venti out too much in the overworld, I usually, take him off the shelf and dust him off whenever I need him for the likes of floor 9 to floor 11 of the Spiral Abyss, or when certain event like, the Hyakunin Iki or certain multi-wave content comes up and I want to clear things fast and get as much points as possible, I'll just slap on Venti. In fact, some of the videos with the likes of, what's his name again? That one Chinese YouTuber. But there's events, videos of whales, like Giga whales and Leviathans doing these kind of events, and they would always bring Venti because it's undeniable that his presence in this situation is just irreplaceable. If I were to add on a bit, this is a bit of an unscripted part, if you were to compare him to the likes of Kazuha and Sucrose, I don't think it's fair to really compare them, because while Kazuha and Sucrose are more centered around providing buffs to the team and having some semblance of CC, but it's still tied behind a cooldown, and they have, I would say to a certain extent, like more of an on-field presence, while Venti is more of like, he just groups enemies, like just EQ, watch everyone group, do a single rotation, and you kind of just forget about him. You could say the same for like Perma-Freeze Kazuha to a certain extent. The way they basically function in a team and for what they offer is just so different that I just don't think it's really fair to compare Venti to anyone, and to that extent, I think that's why Venti is really good. There's only so much you can really compare him to. There's only so much about Kazuha that you can compare him to. Venti is just such a good crowd controller against trash mobs or ads such as this. So I think that in its own already shows his value in the game. To sum things up, both units have their own worth depending on who you ask, but in terms of overall value, I would always go for Venti no matter what. But don't let my personal judgment affect who you want to pull for. If you want JoJo in your account, you can always go for Wriothesley, or maybe if you want to go for an overall meta account value, you can always go for Venti. But otherwise, that is it for the video. So give it a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing if you want to see more, leave a comment down below if you have decided on which character to pull for or maybe why you're skipping, and just let us know in the comments on why you are making this decision that you do. And given that 4.2 is around the corner and the likes of, well, Furina, Fosalors, the Hydro Archon is coming around, very likely I think a lot of people are going to skip this, but for the wanters, for the Wriothesley wanters, just let me know why you want to pull for him down in the comments below. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I wish you all a great day ahead of you. This is Ethereal, signing off.